Mansur's ahead of the game here because he's already got his PowerPoint up and running there, which is great. So let me introduce Dr. Mansur Ali from Cardiff University, talking on aspects of E-Majlis, Nikah, Tarawih and Hadith Audition during the Covid-19 lockdown. And Mansur is a lecturer in Islamic studies at Cardiff. He's an expert on Hadith studies. He has a focus on Islamic ethics and practical theology, and has conducted some very interesting research on different aspects of medical ethics in particular, including work on organ transplantation that I know students here at UWTSD have found very helpful and interesting. So, without saying anything further, let's go forward with the presentation on E-Majlis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And thank you, everyone. Wow, it's been a very long day, and what a fascinating conference it has been. So as opposed to my colleagues who were fantastic panelists who were discussing this from the point of view of lived religion, unfortunately I'm going to delve a bit into kind of textual studies, so it might be a bit heavy at this time of the day. The reason why I'm presenting today is that these ideas have been percolating in my mind since the lockdown, and I don't really know where I'm going with this, and I just want to present to see whether I can get some advice or angle on how to frame this, as I want to kind of write this up as a paper, and I'm going to read my paper academic style. So in the year 826 of the Christian era, the great Hadith scholar Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari made the arduous journey from the steppes of Central Asia to the Yemen for the sole purpose of directly listening and receiving hadiths from the famous scholar Abdul Razzaq as-San'ani. To his dismay, al-Bukhari was late, having reached only after people have finished burying Abdul Razzaq. Thus, when al-Bukhari narrates from Abdul Razzaq, he does so through one of his teachers and not directly. In March 2020, I was sitting in the comfort of my office in Cardiff while participating in a live Zoom session alongside 200 others from all around the world in the reading of the famous Hadith book, Musnad Ahmad. The teacher, Mufti Shabbir Patel, was sitting in his mosque nearly 300 miles away in Blackburn, which is somewhere in the north of England. With the COVID-19 lockdown, the cyber-Islamic environment witnessed a surge of online activities. Although Islamic lectures, Quran recitations, fatwas and sermons were already a reality of religion on cyberspace or religion online, the lockdown ushered in a types of activities the nature of which can only be described as religion in cyberspace or online religion. In this presentation, I look at two issues, and sorry, I had three issues to look at, which is Tarawih, Hadith, and also online Nikah marriages. But I think I've bit too much than I can chew, so I'm just going to look at Hadith and marriages, Nikah marriages. My colleagues, fellow panelists, have touched upon cyber prayers. So in this presentation, I'll look at two issues: Hadith audition over Zoom and live video conference wedding ceremonies. I conclude by making some observations as to why Hadith audition over Zoom is valid and why some scholars argue that cyber marriages are invalid. In discussing the details of both these issues, I move away from the discipline of sociology of religion and delve into the technical world of the Hadith scholar and the fuqaha. This may be difficult for some, but please bear with me. First of all, Hadith studies. In Hadith studies, nothing is more precious than an unbroken chain of transmission. Hadith transmission is deemed as an act of pious devotion, which protects the community from falling into error. It also gives the one who is listening to Hadith the opportunity to come into contact with the mystical charisma of the Prophet, to use a Weberian term. Early scholars made treacherous and dangerous journeys to reduce the number of people between them and the Prophet. This minimized any room for errors. Al-Bukhari was able to boast 22 narrations in his collection which have only 3 people between him and the Prophet. Furthermore, Hadith scholars meticulously detail the mode of transmission and reception of Hadith. Some, like Al-Bukhari, only included material from people where it was ascertained that the 2 narrators met each other at least once. Others, like his student Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj, took a more lenient approach. Muslim believed that as long as the 2 scholars were contemporaries, there is a possibility that they may have met, and that is enough to establish a relationship between them. In addition to this, precise terminologies were developed to accurately register how transmission and audition took place. Thus, words like sami'tu, haddathana, akhbarana, anba'ana were used to reflect direct transmission, and words like katabana, ajazani, mukataban, nawalani denote transmission through a medium such as a letter giving someone license to transmit hadith. The questions that arise here from the point of view of terminology is interesting. Hadith connectivity in Arabic is known as ittisal or ittisaliya, as Graham Ward calls it. Wi-Fi, on the other hand, is known as la silki, literally non-connected or wireless. The irony, at least for the hadith scholar, is apparent. Looking through the myriad of fatwas on this issue, it seems that all are unanimous on the position that hadith is read over phones and video conferencing forums is valid and permissible. However, there are a number of observations here. Since hadith studies is very particular in detailing the method of transmission, how would a Zoom event like the one I was present in be classified? Would it be classified as a direct meeting, liqa, thus fulfill the condition of Al-Bukhari? Furthermore, would it be seen as a short isnad, chain of narrators, and therefore deemed stronger than someone who receives live from the student of that sheikh? These are questions for scholars working within the discipline of hadith studies. Does the internet and cyber Islamic environment make redundant the categorization they already have, and new nomenclatures need to be created to deal with such virtual hadith sessions? So that's all I'm going to say about hadith for the time being. I'll come back to it at the end. Moving on to the live video conference marriages. Legally speaking, marriage in Islam is a civil contract between 2 people, like a transaction contract. It is not a sacrament like Christianity. There are several conditions that need to be fulfilled in order for the marriage contract to be valid. These include an offer or a proposal, the acceptance of that offer, 2 witnesses, and the stipulation of a bridal gift. A bridal gift rather than dowry, because that can cause confusion. Some law schools also include the presence of the wali or guardian who will give the bride away. Consummation is not a condition for the marriage to be valid, although it will have legal implications regarding the bridal gift in the case of divorce or death of the husband. The 2 concerns for virtual nikah are, number 1, whether the people who are doing the contract, al-muta'aqidain, i.e. the groom and the bride, or one of their representative, wali or wakil, need to be in the same space or not. And the second is whether the 2 witnesses are required to be in the same space or not. Scholars who view such marriages to be invalid present an array of sources from the medieval Islamic legal corpora, emphasizing that a nikah marriage is only valid when the marriage contract is enacted with both bride and groom and the 2 witnesses are all in the same physical space. These texts include terms like ittihadul majlis, unity of majlis. Majlis is gathering. Ittihad al-makan, unity of space. Ittihadul zaman, unity of time. Hudur, to be present, etc. However, some Hanafi scholars found a hack around this. So people who have who had their dates, their weddings already arranged, and then the COVID-19 happened and they couldn't get married. They want to get married, they're in 2 different parts of the country or 2 different parts of the world, and then people were doing these Zoom marriages. These scholars who believed that it's not permissible because the conditions are not, basic conditions are not met, still found some creative solutions or hacks around this because it was a genuine need. Thus, Mufti Muhammad Adam Al-Kawthari, Deobandi Mufti from Leicester in the UK, offers the solution that by resorting to the concept of tawqeel or delegation, one is able to delegate a person to marry them off on their behalf. In the Hanafi school of law, the bride can even delegate to the potential groom to marry her off. Thus, the solution that is presented by the Mufti is that in the physical absence of the bride, the groom in front of two witnesses can say, I am marrying the bride on her behest to myself. That's the proposal or the offer. And then respond to this by saying, and I have accepted this proposal. All of this can be done whilst broadcasting live on Zoom or Skype while the bride and other guests are watching. By doing a close reading of the Hanafi legal texts, I have come to the conclusion that such legal gymnastics arise due to a misunderstanding of A, the concept of majlis, and B, an extremely literal and cautious reading of the words of the fuqaha. Thus they conclude that since the fuqaha, the legal scholars, mentioned physical space only for obvious reasons, we cannot extend this to cyberspace. We need textual basis to extend this to cyberspace, thus relegating the role of the mufti to that of fatwa transmitters and not fatwa producers. I will now present some of my findings on this issue. My investigation has led me to believe that cyber nikahs do fulfill the requisites of a valid Islamic nikah. I make the argument that although the fuqaha, the legal scholars, say that ittihadul majlis, as in physical space, is an integral part, arkan, of the nikah contract, it is actually a secondary concern and is there only to fulfill a primary concern or primary condition. I make the argument that if this primary concern is fulfilled through other means, then the ittihadul majlis, or the unity of space, physical space, is not required. So what is this primary concern? The primary concern is the first condition of nikah, which is that the proposal and subsequent acceptance of that proposal must be consecutive, if not immediate. The 12th century Hanafi scholar Alauddin al-Kasani explains, he says that logic dictates that one part of the contract, i.e. the proposal, should not be separated from the second part of the contract, i.e. the acceptance. However, and this is getting a bit technical here and abstract, however, the moment the proposal is vocalized and uttered, it disappears into the ether even before the acceptance of the offer has been vocalized. And you can see that here it's not very clear in the green sound box, proposal, and then you can see acceptance. That's done on purpose, and I'm trying to show that once somebody vocalizes something, then it completely disappears. Okay. However, the moment the proposal is vocalized and uttered, it disappears into the ether even before the acceptance of the offer has been vocalized. Al-Kasani says that adherence to such rigid logic leads to redundancy and blocking the means to enacting any kinds of contracts. Insidad Bab al-Bay'. Thus, Al-Kasani argues this is where the majlis or the session, physical majlis, comes in. The importance of the majlis is to function as a proxy, or a more apt word in our context is a proxy server or a chamber or a bubble, which captures the proposal the moment it is uttered and stops it from disappearing into oblivion. Thus, when the acceptance is also vocalized, it can happily be married to the proposal, pun intended, because the majlis functioned as a facilitator for connecting the proposal to the acceptance. And you can see this one here on my right. This funnel is the majlis, and the majlis is capturing both the proposal and the acceptance. The importance of the majlis is that it fulfills a logical and linguistic necessity. This can also be gleaned from the number of scenarios that the legal scholars, medieval legal scholars, present. Scenario 1. If two people are in a physical space, the witnesses are present and the groom proposes to the bride. The bride does not answer, gets up and walks to the corner of the room and sits down, then accepts. The nikah is not valid. Because despite both being in the same room, the majlis has been interrupted, which means that physical proximity need not be counted as ittihad majlis or the same physical space. Scenario 2. A man not present sends a marriage proposal to a woman through a letter. When the letter reaches her, she gathers witnesses and reads the letter to them. That so-and-so person has written to me proposing to me. All of you witness that I have married myself to him by accepting his proposal. The nikah is valid. Here we have a classic example in the books of fiqh where the bride and groom do not need to be in the same physical space. It is the reading of the letter here which is functioning as the proposal. Thus, in scenario 2, the nikah is valid because the bride read out the proposal in front of the two witnesses. This immediately gave birth to the bubble or the majlis, which preserves the proposal. She then accepts the offer straight away. Since the proposal and the acceptance are now found within the same bubble, the nikah is valid. Discussing the difference between a written proposal and a verbal proposal, the 18th century Damascene scholar Ibn Abidin argues, the verbal proposal is temporal. The moment it is uttered, it disappears into oblivion. Thus, the ittihad al-majlis ensures that the proposal is connected to the acceptance. As for the written material, Ibn Abidin writes that because written material does not get deleted, it can be read in a second majlis or another gathering. Note that he uses the word majlis akhar, which means a second majlis or another majlis. And that it's the written proposal and is reading out in front of two witnesses and then accepting the proposal that brings about the legal effect of the validity of the nikah contract. Ibn Abidin does not mention the durability of the letter. Since writing most likely will not be deleted, what will the lifespan of the letter be? For example, if she rejects the proposal that came in this letter a first time, can she at a later date accept it in front of two witnesses? They haven't discussed this. And if it is the durability of the writing which connects the proposal to acceptance as a majlis, then what about other modes of modern writing methods? What about email, text messages, WhatsApp messages? Would they hold the same legal ruling? What about a text on Snapchat, which disappears once read? Furthermore, if it's durability, then what if the proposal was sent over as an MP4 video or a TikTok video? What about live video sessions in Zoom, providing that there isn't any foul play and malpractice involved? I have only presented two scenarios, but the fuqaha, thank you, Gary. I have only presented two scenarios, but the fuqaha mentioned many more, such as if the entire marriage is being officiated while the couple are riding a horse, then it is invalid. And if they are riding on a ship, then it is valid. How big does the ship have to be before it's is valid? What I tried to establish in this brief foray into the minds of the fuqaha is that they were more concerned with vocalizing of and hearing of the proposal and offer rather than a physical space. The physical space is only important insofar as it facilitates the connectivity of the ijab, the proposal, and the qabul. And now, if I'm correct in my reading, then this opens up the prospect of marrying and marriage over Zoom and Skype, and also via virtual reality. My time is very limited. Some final observations on the two cases of cyber hadith and nikah. The cyberspace can either be used as a tool, which is a means to an end and therefore has no agency, or as an environment, a sacred space where religion is experienced and legal Islamic rulings are enacted. Whilst there, and it was very nice that Professor Rob mentioned about these digital bay'ah. Whilst there is a near consensus amongst Muslim scholars on the permissibility of using the internet as a tool for learning about Islam, the discussion on whether cyberspace can act as a substitute for physical space is heavily contested. The argument is that virtually contrived nearness can never be the same as genuine human connectedness. There is something very postmodern about cyber environments which frustrates boundaries, hierarchies, and authorities. whilst the sociologist Jeffrey Zelinsky argues that in the long run, the internet will favor those religions and spiritual teachings that tend towards anarchy and that lack complex hierarchy. I would add that cyber Hadith Audition does not pollute religiosity or religious practices and therefore is tolerated, whereas there is a fear and risk that something as unprecedented as cyber marriages may pollute, and this is Mary Douglas here, may pollute and violate the sanctity of the maqasid al-sharia and the preservation of the purity of the family. Thus, it is better to be safe than sorry. But scholars and muftis have challenges ahead of them in dealing with issues such as the place of the body in future cyberspace, like full immersive virtual reality. Techno-mystics call this the salvation of the self from meat space, meat as in M-E-A-T, meat space, to virtual space. There is almost something religious about cyberspace, as both are somewhat virtual. Let's watch this cyberspace. Thank you very much.
Oh, that was great. Thank you very much. If there aren't any questions after that, I'll be very, very surprised. There's some really interesting and provoking materials there. And so, yes, I think it's such a valid area to be exploring in that level of detail. So I'm sure we'll get back to some of those issues later on.